Hi, my name is Sasha and I'm the product manager for DNA Sport. This video is intended to update you on the new format of the DNA Sport report. The reason we have upgraded the DNA Sport report is that the previous report simply had the power and endurance and injury and recovery sections without any information on each of the genes included in the section. We have also added genotype-specific results as explanation of each of the variants tested. The genes that are included in the DNA Sport test are able to give lots of information about the various different biological pathways and processes that influence an individual's response to training as well as their performance potential. It is important to understand the information that each gene can give you, as well as to look at the genetic profile as a whole in order to use this information to optimize an individual's training program as well as any nutritional interventions that may need to be made. Before we get into the actual layout of the new DNA Sport test, it's just worth pointing out the gene impact key. So we have no impact, low, moderate, and high impact. The no impact key has recently been added, and this just indicates that the genetic variation that an individual has does not impact their performance potential. We can now go into part 1 of the DNA Sport report, injury and recovery. So we start off with a summary table of the results of this section, and note that the genes that are divided into different categories that can affect athletic performance. When you see moderate or high impact results in the injury section, it indicates that the patient has a somewhat increased risk of injury and an intervention is required. And when you see this in inflammation and oxidative stress, it indicates that a need for recovery strategies is there. The report then goes into each section in more detail. Each gene is described and the impact of the individual results is given, along with basic recommendations. The same is done for inflammation and oxidative stress, but within oxidative stress, I just want to point out that SOD3 and ENOS have been added to this section. You would recognize these two genetic variants from DNA Health, but they've been added to DNA Sport as well in order to give a more well-rounded profile of how an individual may respond to oxidative stress and whether their antioxidant enzymes are working efficiently. This is important because of the energy-producing reactions that occur during exercise, and these result in the formation of free radicals. Our ability to manage this will affect things like muscle soreness and fatigue, and the recovery time required between training sessions. This will also influence our nutritional strategies. At the end of part 1, a summary of the injury risk as well as the recovery profile is given, and training and nutritional recommendations are given as well. We can then move on to part 2 of the report. This section examines genetic variants that are involved in different biological areas that influence an individual's response to training as well as their sporting performance. So these are blood flow and respiration, energy mobilization, fuel metabolism, and the musculoskeletal properties. It must be noted that some of the genes overlap the various different biological areas, but they've just been indicated in one area in order to avoid confusion, and so are in the most relevant area. Insight into each of these biological areas can be used to personalize the exercise program and in order to gain as much as possible from training sessions. It is also important that in part 2 of the report over here, when you see moderate and high impact keys, this is an indication of an advantage with regards to certain types of training and performance. Like for injury and recovery, each section and each gene is then gone into more detail. A description of the gene is given, and then how this person's particular result of the genetic variant is given and how this will impact their training responsiveness. The reason we've done this is that it is so important to know the impact of each gene individually, as well as to look at the overall picture. Just knowing that someone has a large endurance potential isn't enough, because although they may have a great endurance potential, they may also have genetic variants that contribute to advantages for certain types of power and strength activities. So each gene can give you information about this person in order to optimize their training, as well as looking at the overall picture. And this must be used along with everything else and all the other possible tools you have. So I would just like to point out the new gene that we've added to DNA Sport under the fuel metabolism and fuel during exercise. This is the CYP1A2 gene that encodes the main enzyme that catalyzes the oxidation of caffeine. And we know that caffeine is the most commonly used stimulant during exercise because it's been shown to reduce fatigue as well as to improve performance. We know that individuals metabolize caffeine differently, so knowing whether you are a fast or slow metabolizer based on your result of the CYP1A2 variant can help time your caffeine intake before an event in order to gain as much as possible from its effects. So if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine, you'd want to take it in approximately more than an hour before the start of a race, whereas if you're a fast metabolizer, you would want to take your caffeine in closer to the start of a race and perhaps during the race as well. But remember, this of course all depends on the duration of the event that you're participating in. So after each section has been presented in detail and each result is given in detail, a summary of your training responsiveness is given. As we can see, this individual has very high endurance potential as well as having a good power potential as well. And they're likely to benefit from a mixture of these different types of training. So various training recommendations are then given based on this genetic profile. So the previous sport report, if you remember, gave a pie chart with a percentage of power versus endurance. This has been removed because it was leading to the boxing of individuals into one category, either power or endurance, which isn't what we were trying to achieve. We want to find out what type of training is going to benefit this individual and what they're going to be most responsive to and have good adaptations to, so that this type of training can be included in their program in order to make improvements. The pie chart was also previously being used as a ratio for the amount of a certain type of exercise an athlete should be doing, which of course, depending on what that athlete's goal is and on what different sports they partake in, is going to be extremely different between various athletes. So we want to put emphasis on the fact that the knowledge gained from each of individual genes, as well as looking at the overall picture, is extremely important. And then including this with your knowledge of the athlete, what their goals are, what sports they partake in, and what they're trying to achieve, how many times a week they can train, all need to be used together in order to optimize the training program. So key training recommendations are given after this graph. Overall, it's important to look at the injury and recovery strategies in conjunction with the performance potential and use these genetic results as an extra tool to individualize and optimize a training program as well as nutritional strategies.